to The Leak. My name is Anthony McCormack.
I'm Pat McCaffrey.
And I'm Pam Rana. In the news this week, Australians will have their say on the issue of same-sex marriage by postal plebiscite. Tony Abbott has kicked off the campaign by saying that anybody that wants to ward off political correctness should vote no. Actually, I can't finish this story because there is no politically correct way to call Tony Abbott a cunt.
And speaking of Tony Abbott, he's argued Australia should install a missile defence shield to protect us from North Korean missiles. And while there are doubts any shield would be able to stop North Korean attacks, Malcolm Turnbull is still looking at installing it to protect his office from Tony Abbott.
Donald Trump is on a 17-day holiday at his own golf club, which he insists is not a holiday because he's taking meetings and calls. Here he is trying to pass health care reform.
And his war of words with brother from another mother, Kim Jong-un, may bring us into the picture, with Malcolm Turnbull confirming if America was attacked, Australia would enter the conflict on America's side. It's the sort of minor decision our politicians can make without a plebiscite.
WA politicians could vote as early as next year on whether to allow voluntary euthanasia for people with terminal illnesses. Whatever it takes to get out of Perth, it seems.
A Google employee was fired for writing a sexist manifesto in which he claimed men are more successful in tech because of biological superiority. I'm glad to see Google take a stand on sexism. It was either that or, and this is true, stop underpaying female employees across their workforce. So, right choice.
But I mean, have you ever noticed the differences between men and women? I mean, for starters, only a man would write an email to his work buddies and have the blind self-confidence to call it a manifesto.
Google later released an image of the engineer who turns out to actually be a transgender refugee from Syria. Just kidding, here he is. What a jerk.
One Nation Senator and man with a serious case of tinfoil hat hair, Malcolm Roberts, is off to the High Court after being caught lying about climate change. Also after lying about his connection to the coal industry, but specifically going to the High Court for lying about his citizenship status.
The esteemed senator, seen here knowing exactly what your soul smells like, previously claimed that he was unaware of his British dual citizenship, but newly uncovered documents indicate that he was aware as early as age 19. You know, back when he had a sparkle in his eye and no hole in the ozone layer.
And in Queensland, One Nation has endorsed Scott Bannon, a former Hells Angel bikie and world champion kickboxer, to run in the Queensland state election. Scott Dixon, Queensland's One Nation leader, said the sitting Labor MP, Mr Power, would be terrified of facing Mr Bannon because he was, quote, such a strong candidate. When asked, Mr Power said, yeah, that and the whole kickboxing bikie thing, though.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has been photographed on holiday in Siberia with his shirt off. Donald Trump publicly thanked him and is taking another 17-day holiday just to cool down.
Malcolm Turnbull delivered part of his speech at the Gama Festival in the Yolngu dialect. When going on to speak about the possibility of a constitutionally recognised Indigenous voice in Canberra, Turnbull said in his own local dialect what roughly translates to, yeah, nah.
There is speculation that Mark Zuckerberg may run for president in 2020. Of course, it's hard to imagine a socially awkward billionaire with a questionable public image becoming president, but at least he already has his campaign slogan, which is, I know what the average voter is thinking, and feeling, and buying, and sharing, and private messaging to their most intimate friends, and their bank account details, and I'm watching you right now.
And finally, Usain Bolt has retired from sprinting, but not in the way he had hoped, finishing third in his last race. He had hoped to finish fourth. Well, those are our headlines, but fantastic news for refugees held captive in the offshore Manus Island Detention Centre. The Australian government is finally getting around to closing the place for good. In not so fantastic news, they're closing it with the refugees inside. The future is still uncertain for the 800 or so people locked up in the tropical prison, but one thing is for certain. Uncertainty!
So, last year, the PNG Supreme Court ruled the detention centre illegal and it must close by October. Australia's solution to this? Literally closing the centre around these people. Power, water, and medical services are being cut off to try and pressure them to leave.
And it was clear to anyone really reading the Trump-Turnbull transcript last Friday that the president had gone into that conversation having done zero research. And it was almost refreshing to see him in real time give the matter more thought than our own government has. Here's a little taste, for instance, from the transcript. Trump, I hate taking these people. I guarantee you they are bad. That is why they are in prison right now. They are not going to be wonderful people who go on to work for the local milk people.
Turnbull, I would not be so sure about that. They are basically...
Trump cuts him off. Well, maybe you should let them out of prison.
And scene.
You see? Even Dorito Tits gets it. They're not guilty. They shouldn't be in prison. Maybe they could still go to the U.S. I don't know. Maybe that's what the whole phone call was about. Turnbull begging Trump to just let them become, you know, local milk people.
Is that still possible when you have presidential aide Stephen Miller basically announcing a new merit-based immigration policy that would literally require them to be milk people? Milky white, vanilla faces. I'm saying they're all racist.
And Turnbull isn't even insisting the US take them. He's merely insisting that they go through the process.
Yeah, right. The process of almost taking them and then not.
So real talk, they're probably not going to the US.
Well, if it wasn't a terrible idea, they could leave the detention center anytime they wanted and just stay in PNG.
Well, but exactly. I mean, they're not safe in the local population, as demonstrated earlier in the week when another detainee was found dead outside the compound. And in the last month alone, there have been 4 major attacks on asylum seekers, including one man hacked with a machete so severely he needed emergency medical treatment.
So they're keeping them in terrible conditions, depriving them of essentials, torturing these poor people, trying to make them leave. But as long as they stay in the detention center, they're still the responsibility of the Australian government, and they still have a shred of hope of getting to Australia. So that's how the government works? Like a frat house hazing people?
I feel like hazing is less cruel because it implies that the bras will actually let you stay if you submit to their paddling.
Well, you don't want to know what happens if you come last in the boat race.
So if it closes in October and they're still there, they don't get sent to the US, they don't join the unsafe PNG population, where will they go?
The most sensible answer is, and always has been, to bring them here, which is the cheapest, sanest, most humane option.
Yeah, well, that's not the stance that wins elections, apparently.
Why is it, though, that when people win elections, they always break the good promises but just keep the really bad ones?
I have a feeling this will come up again after the break. Stay tuned.
Equal marriage. For some Liberals, they're the 2 scariest words since working mothers. Having failed to pass the original plebiscite, the Coalition is now moving to hold a plebiscite conducted by post, administered by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Because, you know, if you're defending a 1950s worldview, why not do it using what the 1950s would consider technology? Administered by an organisation still catching up with the 1950s. And its voluntary and postal nature make it barely representative. And it's costing $122 million. And if it's that expensive and that unrepresentative, it should just basically be a member of the royal family at this point. Which makes Turnbull's involvement even stranger. But even worse, because it's not a real vote, standards in advertising won't apply. So now, when the Australian Christian lobby tells you that gays are sex offenders, that message will be delivered by a much more immediate threat. Now look, I'll be honest, marriage isn't for me. I think it's an institution that's steeped in weird patriarchal attitudes, and sometimes the way Conservatives talk about marriage makes me wonder whether they want anyone else to join in.
It was something that evolved many centuries ago to protect women and children.
Yeah, try telling that to any of Henry VIII's wives. But even if I don't want to get married myself, I still think it's important that I have the same options as anyone else. To me, marriage is like casting Casey Affleck. I wouldn't do it, but I also don't think people like me should be prevented from doing it. And it has a history of questionable attitudes towards women. And it's important to remember that there is a real sense of urgency in this debate, because there are thousands of older gay Australians who are desperate to marry, because time, unlike their partner, is running out on them. Hang in there, beloved high school librarian Mrs. Morris. I will be your flower girl. But already we're seeing worrying signs that this plebiscite won't have much to do with equal marriage at all.
If you're worried about freedom of speech and freedom of religion, vote no. And if you don't like political correctness, vote no.
Well, to quote a famous political philosopher,
Nope. Nope.
political correctness is not only irrelevant, it's wrong to say equal marriage is politically correct. That'd be like if I said, hey, who do you think would win in a fight between Batman and Superman? I mean, Batman has superior technology, but Superman is basically invincible and can fly. And then Abbott came in and said, I've never cared for Sigrid Thornton. You're wrong, that's irrelevant, and it's a shit opinion. She was too good for Diver Dan. But political correctness is a clear precursor of what's to come. Because it won't be long now until someone utters the incantation, safe schools, and summons the hordes of Andrew Bolt blog commenters. You know, those people who start sentences with, I think Mark Latham made a good point the other day. Or, you know, like, shit, I love Mother Energy drinks, eh? And then they'll turn this into a debate about whether two gay people can get married, and they'll turn it from that into a debate about safe schools and genderless bathrooms and whether massage is too gay. But most depressing of all is that this is how big our politics is now. The government is tearing itself apart over an issue that's so simple, even Bill Shorten has a clear position on it. I mean, Conservatives, if we can't even get equal marriage passed, relax. Australia's never going to get around to letting us convert your kids and marry our dogs. But seriously, Coalition, is this really the hill you want to die on? Equal marriage. I mean, the thing that heaps of other countries have and their societies aren't crumbling. You guys have been wedded to your opposition to equal marriage for such a long time. But you might just need to accept it's time to move on. I mean, sure, you've tried to spice things up with a little polygamy here, a little bestiality there, and, you know. Now you're asking for our advice? Well, I say, let's give it to them. Not like that. I mean, if Conservatives want our advice and they want a postal plebiscite to slant this vote towards older Australians and the no vote, then young Australians need to go to aec.gov.au to enrol or update their details by August 24th. Win this plebiscite and then, come the next election, send a message to the Coalition that while they were worried about redefining marriage, we went ahead and redefined career-ending failure.
Very, very well said, Pat. And as Pat mentioned, Bill Shorten surprisingly has a very strong opinion on this, and here is that opinion now.
Prime Minister, I loathe the trolls and the haters, but I expected more from him. I hold you responsible for every hurtful bit of filth that this debate will unleash. Not because the Prime Minister has said it, not because he agrees to it, he clearly doesn't, but because the Prime Minister has licensed this debate. You are the leader, Mr Turnbull. You have given permission. I will never hold you in the same light ever again. I hold the Prime Minister responsible, and the Australians will too.
Now, Dr. Pam, I want to throw this to you because as someone that could potentially marry any man that you wanted, but you are being drawn into this, as we all are, you know, your opinion on the yes or no. How do you feel about this whole?
Okay, first of all, thanks for saying I could marry anyone I wanted. That's nice. I'll just update my Tinder.
Or no one if you choose.
Thank you again. Listen, I find it so incomprehensible to be able to wrap my head around the concept of our political leaders not understanding equality, that I have chosen to believe that this is all about bolstering the failing postal service. So that's my stance, and I'm sticking to it.
It blows my mind, really, that what we're having now is a plebiscite that was only really designed by Tony Abbott to basically come up with a way to solve, in a temporary sense, a huge internal division in the Liberal Party. We have a plebiscite that now is being presented by people as a way of, like, getting Australians' opinion on an issue, when really I'm just deeply uncomfortable with a majority vote on minority rights, unless you absolutely have to for some reason. I mean, yeah, the whole thing is uncomfortable. And we're in this position now, and I think, like I said, I think we have to fight this, and we have to hopefully win this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. It could be a fatal mistake for the Coalition, but it could be a really good thing for our postal service. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to The Leak. Well, barely a week goes by where we're not hearing some kind of scandal about Donald Trump on the Twitter. To tell us all about it is our social media correspondent, Nick Jones. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tone Worlds. It's a pleasure to be here at The Leak Club.
Do you? have to talk like that?
Probably not, but I'm going to anyway. Hashtag nevertheless, he persisted.
Now, Nick, you're here as a social media consultant, which I'll be honest, sounds to me like a made-up job, like, you know, cat masseuse or personal trainer.
Oh, Pat McCaffrey, you're as naive as you are beautiful.
I'll take it. But as the expert, right, can you walk us through the blunders that Donald Trump is constantly making?
That's nonsense. In his own tweet, President Trump describes himself as modern-day presidential.
Well, concerns have been raised that as many as half of Mr. Trump's followers are suspect, with a vast number of them apparently being bots.
Pam, it would be insane to suggest that all of the 35 million plus followers that this charismatic leader of men has are human, but isn't it a sign of our times that even our automaton friends are voting for him? When the machine uprising happens, and it will happen, it will herald in a new utopia between man and machine, linked in, if you will, under Trump.
But, Nick, I think Pam's talking about Nicole Mincy.
Well, she's not a bot. She's a charismatic young person whom the president retweeted and thanked. Young people are getting involved in the political process. Over half of 18 to 29-year-olds got their information about the 2016 US election from online sources and using social media to facilitate it. What could possibly be wrong with that?
Oh, I mean, for one thing, she doesn't exist, though.
But she has almost 150,000 followers.
Who also don't exist.
But I've seen photos of them on Pinterest.
Yeah, see, the thing about that is that all these young people are models from placeit.net with pro-Trump apparel photoshopped onto stock photos with the words, "your image here."
Yeah, if you're gonna make up a Republican, make them young and black. That'll fool us.
I will remind you both that correlation is not causation, and how these entrepreneurial young people choose to make money is not the subject of debate.
Well, but, I mean, Nick,
Snap your chat, Pat. Trump is an immensely popular man, and of course lesser men will connive and scheme to besmirch his reputation out of petty jealousy. We have the numbers on our side, we have the real facts on our side, everything else is irrelevant.
Well, let me put this poll to you. It indicates some 59% of Americans believe the first 200 days of the Trump presidency has been a failure.
Sources, I demand to see your search history.
Well, this comes from CNN.
CNN, they're just part of the 110 million plus members of the hashtag fake news conspiracy. Look, a meme.
he's gone?
The meme craftily covered his escape.
Yeah. I think he was a bot this whole time.
I should have my phone off, but I've just been followed by Nick Jones Trump Lover 89.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, mine's Nicole Mincy.
Well, Victoria is in the midst of a crime wave, if you believe the mainstream media, and if you don't, you're next. So we sent our own David Rose to find out whether we need to be tougher on crime.
Crime. What is it? Where does it come from? How many has Donald Trump committed? The Victorian government recently released a bunch of statistics about crime in our state, and there's been some crazy conclusions. Turns out from April last year to April this year, there's been a 4% increase in crime across the state, and there's been a 20% increase in robbery. So I guess the real question is, what's going on in Victoria? All right, well, we know crime is a problem. How do we solve it? Now, both parties in Victoria, they have their own solutions. The Labor Party, they want to introduce tougher restrictions on bail. That mean people who've committed violent offences can't be given bail. The Liberal Party, they have their own solution. They want to introduce something called mandatory minimum sentencing. We're sitting here with Michael Sharpley. Michael is a lawyer who's been practicing in the criminal field for 35 years, and he's also the grandfather of my girlfriend. So we've sat down with him today to talk crime and make a good impression. Would you mind explaining briefly what a mandatory minimum is?
Well, a mandatory minimum requires that if you commit a designated offence, if you commit a rape, for example, no matter what kind of rape and no matter in what circumstances, you receive a particular minimum penalty. Well, I think they're a dreadful idea. I've always thought they're a dreadful idea. And I've been fulminating against them for many years, actually. I mean, the whole point of it is you appoint judges and magistrates, you pay them a lot of money, and then you effectively say, well, you're incapable of making a proper decision, so we're taking it away from you.
So maybe you're thinking, all right, David, you seem like a pretty cool guy. You look like someone who recycles. Thank you, I do. But do I even know anything about crime? You're probably wondering, have I even met a criminal before? Look at me, I'm wearing a tie. I clearly went to private school. I know a lot of criminals. I mean, they are all white-collar criminals, but, you know, embezzlement takes work. Hey, so we're here with Doug Chappell. Doug's a comedian. He's also got a master's in psychology.
Well, I always had a passion for sort of helping people, I think. I grew up in a sort of working class area. I think I'm sort of drawn to sort of the people you grow up with, and you've seen a cycle continue. So you sort of, if you can, you want to help break that cycle.
Well, I think A, how do you break that cycle? And B, I mean, what is it about these areas that leads to so much criminality?
I think that the main thing is if you get people when they're sort of younger and have programs and have sort of things where you can intervene.
All right, so we got changes to our Bail Act, we got mandatory minimum sentencing. I guess the real question is, does any of this tough on crime stuff actually work? The Law Institute of Victoria, now this is an advisory body for the government. They released a report, and the conclusion they came to was that mandatory minimums increase crime. And the reason is actually pretty simple when you think about it. See, you get these people who've committed like one crime in their whole lives. You bring a mandatory minimum in, those people have to go to prison. And once they're in prison, they meet people who sometimes are lifetime offenders. They start swapping war stories, they learn things about one another, and suddenly you've got all these new people with newfound information about crime back in the population, ready to commit more crimes. So, you know, it's criminal fads popping up everywhere. It's like the crime version of fidget spinners.
Well, here at The Leak, we love international affairs so much that we're introducing a whole new segment just to cover it all. So, welcome to our new segment, Pertinent Everywhere Everything Else News, or
Last week in China, a chatbot developed for popular instant messaging service QQ was shut down after it began to make controversial statements about the Chinese government.
Now, chatbots going rogue isn't a new thing. Notably, Microsoft's Tay AI was shut down after online trolls trained it to make racist comments. The problem with the Chinese chatbot was not inflammatory language or support for Hitler, but its condemnation of the Communist Party and support for democracy.
It does serve to remind Chinese political dissidents to up their game if they don't want their jobs to be outsourced to cheap imported robots.
And in Rwanda, controversial President Paul Kagame was re-elected for a third term with 98% of the vote, with a margin of error of only 98%.
Kagame has been credited for bringing stability and growth to the country following the 1994 genocide. However, he's widely criticised for authoritarian rule and abolishing term limits, a constitutional change he made conveniently before his election.
So he can now hold power until 2034, or until the next genocide.
Still on the theme of landslide votes and authoritarian leaders, the UN Security Council has unanimously decided to impose tougher sanctions on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This comes as North Korea threatened military strikes on the American territory of Guam. So if you've ever wanted to figure out exactly where Guam is on a map, get onto that soon.
The threats were in retaliation for remarks made by President Trump, and I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but North Korea has a point.
Trump said Kim Jong-un has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. First of all, Trump expects North Korea to be normal? Secondly, he goes on to say they'll be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which the world has never seen before. You know, exactly how normal people talk.
Speaking of murderous autocratic dictators, the Queen of England was recently the subject of much speculation after reports that she drinks 4 cocktails per day. Unfortunately, those stories were apparently debunked, once again destroying hopes that the Queen actually does anything of interest.
But the Queen's steadfast refusal to do anything even vaguely scandalous is probably her second best asset, next to, you know, all the wealth. And of course, Prince Philip, her hilariously culturally insensitive cadaver, who announced that he will be retiring from his royal duties this month.
Taking on some of Prince Philip's duties is Prince William, who has reportedly quit his day job as a helicopter rescue pilot. To be clear, quitting saving people's lives to do what Prince Philip does. Ask stupid questions, that kind of thing.
Elsewhere in this extremely specific royal demographic, Prince Henrik, consort to Queen Margaret of Denmark, is refusing to be buried in the same grave as his wife.
Prince Henrique is protesting that as consort to the ruling queen, he was never named king and forced to be content with the lowly title of prince consort. He considers this to be an example of gender discrimination. There it is, ladies, the end of the road for gender equality, with an 83-year-old monarch throwing a fit and nursing his ego in a private French vineyard.
Like many, a modern royal, Henrik has managed to stave off obsolescence by finding a cause to fight for. Diana had the landmines, Prince Charles has the environment, and Henrik is fighting for Henrik. Truly the 99% of the 1%. And that's the end of our show. Please thank our correspondents Nick Jones and David Rose, and of course our lovely hosts Pam Rana and Pat McCaffrey. Stay tuned after our show for our weekly live post show. Next week is our final episode of this series. Please join us then. Until then, I'm Anthony McCormack. Good night.